Hey guys, and welcome to the channel. So today we're going to be talking about what you see behind me. This was my attempt at a foam and cement background. So there were some things that I didn't quite like about it, but overall I think that it turned out honestly really good. I kind of like the way it looks. There were some things that I think I could have improved upon, and I will point those out to you as they come about, but I can't say that I'm mad. It doesn't look too shabby. So this is what it looks like. This is it in all of its glory. So just to kind of give you a rundown of the materials that I used, I went to Lowe's and I bought some concrete, and I bought this concrete based on having seen it in Serpa Designs YouTube video, and it seemed like it would be really good for any moisture, and so I knew that I was going to have live plants in here, so humidity might be a little high on the days that I water the plants. So I knew that I needed something that could put up with some moisture, so that's why I chose that concrete. And then I got these styrofoam panels. They were pretty inexpensive, and it comes with 6 panels in each package, and I got 2 packages. I only ended up using 1, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to save the second package for my other enclosure build. Just for your reference, they are 48 inches long, which is exactly on par with how big my enclosure is. So that actually worked out very well for me. So that was the base of my materials. Just to give you a little bit of background about what is sitting in right here. So this is a new enclosure that I just finished building. I'm going to be making it bioactive here in the next couple of weeks. But as far as the dimensions of the enclosure itself, it is 4 feet long, 3 feet tall, and 2 inches, I mean not 2 inches, 2 feet deep. So that's just to give you an idea. And so what I ended up having to do as far as these panels are concerned, in order to get the height that I needed, the 3 feet, I had to stack nearly, like, it's probably about 2.5. I ended up using 2.5 panels on top of each other in order to get this height. And then as far as the length itself, because it was right on par with 48 inches, I only had to cut off a smidge, and that was just to make sure that I could fit it back into the enclosure and that it would fit snug, but that it wouldn't be bending forward from the pressure. So that's what I did to kind of get it to fit. And then in order to make sure that I had a strong foundation, I decided to pallet to kind of layer the panels. So I had those 3 panels as that back layer, and then I decided to put another layer of 3 panels, or 2.5 technically, 2.5 panels on top of that. So I have 2 panels thick for my foundation. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense, but you will see it in the video. So I have 2 panels thick of foundation, and then on that very top layer is where I started to put my cement. So after having used I ended up using 5 panels essentially for just the foundation of it. That left me with 1 full panel and then a couple of scrap pieces in order to make the dimensions and things that I wanted to do. So you can see I kind of made this shelf type vibe right here. Originally, when I put this on here, I wanted it to be like an enclosed thing, kind of like a cave. But then as I started building it out, it just didn't turn out that way. So it's kind of like this open shelf unit here. And then at the very top, I have a plant holder where I'm going to put a plant to kind of vine down. And then behind me in this corner, I just have some more, like I kind of just stacked the panels so that they kind of create like a hump type of look over there in that corner. And then I know you guys are going to be super curious about why I decided to put a shelf right here. And just to kind of make a long story short, the main reason why that shelf is in there is because as I've been developing this enclosure, like my idea of where things were going to be and how I was going to do things has changed so many times. And so originally I wanted to use heat bulbs to light this enclosure. And by the way, that's just an LED light that I just have to illuminate things. I might end up putting it in an enclosure, but it's going to look different. But anyway, so originally I wanted to use heat bulbs to light the enclosure, but then I kind of decided not to do that and I wanted to stick with heating pads. But then I was trying to figure out how I was going to put a heating pad on the enclosure and all these other things. Anyway, that's not what you're here for. All I want you to know is that I put in this shelf for my heat pad, and you're gonna see what I mean by that in a future video if you really care. But just know that's why I put that shelf in there. And so I actually love the way the shelf turned out. I'm not mad at all about the shelf. It kind of gives her more square footage to roam around her enclosure, so she can climb. It'll give her a lot of climbing opportunities and things like that. So I really like the shelf. So the last thing I want to touch on before I actually jump into the actual build of the background is when I was building the background, I wanted to separate it into two giant pieces. So I essentially just cut it down the middle. That way it would be easier to install. From like the weight of the cement and just my lack of making sure that I had a really solid foundation, it kind of split into four different pieces. I essentially have four panels. I have a panel here, a panel here, a panel here, and a panel here. And you will see that later in the video, but that's kind of why you're seeing this line of demarcation kind of down the middle And then it's kind of harder to see it here with the shelf, but then there's another line right where the shelf hits that kind of separates all 4 of these pieces. Because of that, the shelves aren't exactly linear with one another. They don't line up completely. So this one, for example, kind of sits out a little bit further than this one, and it's just because of the way I had to kind of make everything fit tight in there. And so it is what it is. Like I said, I'm not mad about it, but those are just things that I noticed as the build was coming about, that if I would have done my due diligence to make sure my foundation was stronger, maybe they wouldn't have split or something like that. I'm not really sure. All right, guys, so now that I've kind of given you a rundown on why I did what I did and where I did it, now I was trying to go ahead and jump straight into the build. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let's jump into it. All right, guys, so you've pretty much previewed the build up until this point. So what you see me now is I'm trying to put in these distress lines just to kind of give it some added texture, so it doesn't look like it's just one note. And I'm using my styrofoam cutter tool to do that. And now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to flip it to the back. And I drew this line in when I first started, and this is basically half of the background. And so my plan here was to cut the background completely in half. That way it would be easier to install. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier, is my plan was to cut it into 2 halves, but then it ended up cutting into 4 quarters once I tried to lift it after I put my concrete on, and you'll see that later. But that's what I'm doing here on this part. So once I got everything cut, I laid it out the way that it would be in the enclosure, and then it was time to put on my concrete. And this is when I started to realize that this concrete was setting way quicker than I needed it to. And so you saw me make the mixture earlier, and I was trying to make the mixture runny, and I realized it's just not going to work that way. So I just had to get in there, and I had to use my hands. And actually using my hands wasn't actually a issue, because I was using my hands, it added a lot of texture that otherwise I think would have been harder to accomplish. So I'm just not realizing that I failed to record a video of me cutting out the slot for that piece of board for my shelf. And so just know that I used the styrofoam cutter that I've been using in this whole entire build to cut out a slot that was the length that I needed in order for that board to be able to slide through and mount on the back of the enclosure. Alright, once I got everything covered with an initial coat, I tried to make my second coat as runny as possible. That way it could fall into all the nooks and crannies and make sure everything was completely and thoroughly covered. And so that's what you see me brushing on right now, is my second and final coat. So by the next day, everything was completely dry, and it was time to get our shelf in action. So I made sure everything fit snug just to my liking, and then I marked where my shelf needed to go, and then I just used some screws to mount it into place and some L brackets. Now it's time for the 4 panels that I mentioned. Again, after my concrete had set and then I tried to lift them to move them, that's when it broke into the other pieces. My 2 halves broke into 2 halves. These are the 4 panels that I was talking about, and then I'm just trying to fit them into place and get them in there tight and snug before I start permanently adhering everything. Once I was happy with the way everything looked, I decided to silicone it all into place. And I like to mention that all of my panels do not necessarily make contact with the wall at all points, just because I do have those support beams in the corners, and so they kind of stick out further than my actual back wall. So I tried to focus my silicone in the areas where I knew it was making contact with the wall, and that may be confusing, but just know that I don't have full contact on the wall. Alright guys, so once I siliconed everything, I had to use whatever I had around the house that was heavy to push against the wall to make sure that it stayed put and in place. And now we just let it dry. So by the next day, I felt that it was safe to go ahead and remove all of my laundry detergent containers and get those out the way. And I decided to focus my efforts on these very obvious cracks from my 4 different panels. And so I just grabbed some more of that concrete, mixed it up, and I decided to stuff it in these cracks just to kind of help that blend a little bit more seamlessly. Alrighty y'all, so after the dust has settled, this is our finished product. Most of the concrete is dry at this point. And like I said, I like the way it turned out. It definitely has a lot of texture to it. And although there were a couple of flaws, I am very, very proud of this project. Alright guys, so that is it for me and this background build. I hope you guys found it somewhat entertaining. If you did, make sure that you give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye! I quickly wanted to pop in and say that we reached a milestone this weekend. So I am finally at 100 subscribers, and I just want to thank you guys. You have been so well receiving and so nice to me as I've been trying to figure this whole YouTube thing out, and I just want to thank you for your support and your continued support as we are on the road to many more milestones. So that's my quick check-in. I hope to see you guys in my next video. Peace out.